Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Hi, everyone. I'm going to get back to reading and working through the Go Show with you soon. I know we're in the midst of a huge one. Actually, we've gotten quite a fair bit through it. But I want to take this moment to address something that comes up a lot. And again, I'm here. My mission is to try to make this Buddhist journey, this practice, more understandable to us, our Sangha. So, a very contentious word in our Western language is truth. I'm not sure that it belongs in Buddhist literature and Buddhist translations, but translations by their very nature are created by Westerners, and so Westerners tend to use terms that they're familiar with. Unfortunately, that can be very confusing to the Buddhist student, which we all are. This is the Western, if you will, meaning of the word monk. We are determined students. That's what a monk is. Your determination belongs to you. So there's no organization or rule or I know you're going to talk about precepts and so forth. I'm talking about the culminating teachings of the Buddha in the remaining years of his life. Put it together. No rules. It's all on you and me. This is our Buddhism. This is our Buddhahood. And it's up to us to make it happen. But yeah, to get there, people had to learn. We had to, Shakyamuni, just like Nichiren, just like Tendai before him, and other great scholars and bodhisattvas like Nagarjuna, in their cultures and their time, had to teach or argue or clarify the meaning. You hear me talk about this over and over again. It's not about the words, it's about the meaning of the words. And when when Shakyamuni was first teaching this, he had to deal with people who didn't understand the very nature of their own mind, how their mind and body were interrelated, how they perceived the world was a function of how their mind worked. Well, think about almost 3,000 years ago, we have people today that walk around and don't understand. And truth, the subject of this video, is today so subjective, so malleable, that it barely clings to any kind of meaning at all. So for the purposes of this video, and to facilitate your understanding of Buddhist sutras, Buddhist sermon, Buddhist commentaries, and so forth, I want to clarify something, at least try to. You're going to run into this word a lot, and it's going to confuse you. And the reason is because I would say there are three truths. And I'm going to put this up on the screen. I'm going to leave it up for a little bit so you can digest it, maybe do a frame grab and print it, whatever. The first thing that, without being too obvious, I think I can say that human truth is a specific kind of truth, and it's a truth that as we study Buddhism, we become much more and more clear on. We come to terms with the truth that is human truth. Read the perception of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Nagarjuna did a superlative job of taking apart the way human truth works. I synopsized it as the ideas you choose to invest your identity and perception of reality to. So, We've all heard the many cliches about 10 people walk past a fountain in a park and all 10 people remember the fountain differently. That's what we're talking about here. This is human truth, and it pervades every single thought we have. The very perception of self is a human truth. Okay? I wrote some notes and I didn't bring them in here with me, but I usually wing this anyway, right? So, I always wing this. The second kind of truth, which you might at first conflate with human truth, but it really is distinct in its own right, is scientific truth. A scientific truth is also a human truth, but it's a human truth that instead of being so much a choice as we see today, scientific truth has the ideal of demonstrably showing that our observed ideas of reality can be repeated and shown to actually substantiate for all of those who use these rules of science, perceive the world in the same way. So it's less individualized and it's a broader, more considered analysis of what we consider to be truth by experimentation, by proof, by repetition, by demonstrably showing that, yes, water is wet. When anything goes in water, whether it's a human hand or a towel or an animal, it experiences something we call wet. So that's more a scientific truth. It might be a small, what do they call it, picking at straws or whatever, but it is identifiably a different kind of a truth. And then we come to the third kind of truth. Why, Sifu, what do you mean a third kind of truth? That's all the truth there is. If you're a student of Buddhism, this is the truth that will slip away from you as you study. Because as we study in Buddhism, the stories that are used to teach are filled with human truth and the foibles of human truths and the fantasies of human truths. And Buddhism is very clever about using all sorts of allegories like floating bodhisattvas and many Buddhas and all of these things, playing on that idea of malleable human truth in order to substantiate a meaning. Not because those things are the truth, but because they are skillful means, expedient devices to manipulate the human mind, the human truth, samsaric identity, with higher concepts. And this is where things can get confusing, because I don't know a student yet, I haven't met one yet, including myself, that struggled with this idea. It seems too, it seems too mystical, because we want to take everything that comes into our mind as factual. And when we read through these things, they sound like, come on, right? But they're not meant to be factual. They're meant to direct your mental activity, to direct your mind towards something that's much more fundamental. That's so fundamental that it's so subtle, yet it permeates and underlies everything. That's what's difficult to hang on to. And that's what I would call the Buddhist truth. It's a truth that is an underlying nature of all, of all human perception. What's the underlying nature of human perception? And the nature of the formations of life. I don't know if that's the best description I could come up with, but the formations of life, you may automatically, that may trigger your inner scientist, your inner professor, right? But be careful here. Psychologists are fond of talking about this inner professor. They call it the id. And what is the id? It is a partial constitution of what is your ego. And what is the ego? It is the self. And what is the self? As Buddhism teaches us, the self is a construction of our own minds. So you see where this gets really a little dicey about keeping these ideas straight? Because here's the thing, and I've said this many times, Buddhism is a science, a philosophy, a method of living life well. It's a very pragmatic thing, Buddhism. Because Buddhism and attaining Buddhahood is about living this life in this samsaric condition, this human mind with this human and scientific truths applied to our human mind, a different perspective, a perspective that seeks to uncover what is fundamentally buoying up this whole thing. Human truth, scientific truth, subjective, objective, all of it. Why is truth even a thing, if you will? Now you start to ask a very different question. Right? And you will hear other Buddhists talk about who is doing the thinking. But I find that to be confusing because then we still get hung up on identity. Buddhism is about getting underneath identity. The whole samsaric reality, our universe, our lives, grass, trees, dogs, humans, all predicated on identity, identification of things. Remember, I've said before, we're category makers, we're pattern makers or observers. We're constantly putting things and defining things. But what drives us to do that? What is fundamentally supporting this human behavior? And beyond that, the behavior of all life. Why rhododendron? Why earth, forest, trees, you, me? What supports that? And not, again, I've said why is a trap. I should say how. That's more interesting. Forget why, because again, that's identity politics. Why? This versus that. Right? And how many times do you read in Buddhist scripture or sutra, not this, not that, not this, not that, right? We attack it through language to get to suchnesses, and suchnesses are identification still. So how can we talk about this underlying movement? A term that I've chosen to define that so that my brain can come to rest with it is quiescent energy. It's almost an oxymoron because we think of energy as movement, flow, stuff, right? Action, reaction. But if it's quiescent, what does that look like? If energy is quiescent, what does it look like? In my mind, it looks and sounds like a hum, just this barely perceptible frequency, movement, motion, almost undisturbed. But there's something. There's something that then precipitates everything we know and experience, everything we feel, everything our mind seizes upon has this source of what I've also termed potential. Ancient Chinese philosophies has ideas about this. Look up Wu Ji, W-U-J-I, Wu Ji. It's a point, which is a location, not a thing, and a circle containing everything at the same time. Again, there's all these poetic ways of talking around it, but how do we understand it? This is why we chant Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, to sync our mind, our human mind up with a very fundamental truth, vibration, quiescent energy, potential, and how our minds are our minds. We're still going to say, well, what is that? How do I do that? What does that look like? That is the reason for the Buddhist teachings, to get you to start to grapple with that and define it. And the only way you can define it fully isn't to read it in a book and go, 2 + 2 = 4. No, here's the thing is, you are one of the twos, and your mind is another one of the twos. And what it equals is Buddhahood. So now solve for X. You can only find it for yourself. It is in your mind, in the way your mind works, in your potential, in your quiescent energy, your formation of life that has a very specific path that you can then track back into that quiescent, all-knowing, all-potential space. That's why it's yours and yours alone. We can share a lot about it. That's Buddhist teaching. And when we share, we are a sangha, because we are using these teachings in order to direct us into our own specific Buddha mind. Does that make sense? So I could say there's a fourth truth. There's a Buddhist truth that is true for all living and sentient and now non-sentient things. This is what we practice. But the fourth truth would be yours, your specific truth. I hope that makes sense. I hope that helps you when you're reading this material and all of these sutras and commentaries to keep put a post-it note on the wall or back of your mind that all this sometimes very fanciful language is all circling around something very, very, very subtle, very minute. But because of that, it is so fundamental, it permeates everything. When that becomes obvious, your practice will shift into another gear, I promise you. And when we chant to Gohonzon, Nichiren has provided us a method of connecting with it without fail. But what is the it that we connect with? That's up to you. That's up to your study. That's up to you, the level of your understanding of the meaning of these teachings. I'm glad you're going there with me, and I really appreciate your time. And I can't wait to get back to the Go Show. But I felt like I needed to talk about this idea of truth that we all struggle with all the time. Thanks so much for watching. Thank you dearly to my Patreon supporters who keep making this possible for me. If you can, please help out. If not, you're helping me by participating. So don't feel like you're missing out on anything or, just if you can. I can't even tell you how grateful I am. If not, I'm grateful for you just being here. Thanks. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. See you again.